We need to have a realization that we've got about 35 years worth of oil left in the whole world. We're going to run out of oil.
5 decades on, there are now 12 members, and they sit on top of 3/4 of the world's proven reserves. 1 trillion barrels of oil by their own estimates.
A trillion plus reserve is very, very accurate.
We've got about 35 years worth of oil left in the whole world. We're going to run out of oil.
In April of 2018, U.S. crude production exceeded the previous record set in 1970 and has continued to rise, currently above 12.6 million barrels per day. This, combined with voluntary cuts by OPEC and its economic allies, has given the U.S. the title of the world's largest crude-producing country.
The U.S.'s previous peak, its first peak, was right around 10 million barrels per day back in 1970.
We're going to run out of oil.
What a sham. What kind of a show are you guys putting on here today?
Paul's picture of doom and gloom looked real.
Net world population is increasing by 23 people every 10 seconds. It's clear that world population growth remains completely out of control.
I bought it totally. Many of my friends bought it totally. I organized an event for 60 people to starve in public.
What are you trying to prove?
It's about pain in the world. Maybe anybody who's thinking of having a third child ought to go hungry a week.
Several days ago, crowds formed to protest being sterilized. The police opened fire and killed at least 50 of them.
The core message of the book, population growth outstripping food supply, resonated quite a bit with India's elites, with the middle classes. They much preferred to believe that the poor were poor because of too many children, rather than being poor because of an unfair and unequal economic system.
Ehrlich's message could be summed up in a dramatic prediction.
Sometime in the next 15 years, the end will come.
Okay!
And by the end, I mean an utter breakdown of the capacity of the planet to support humanity.
Okay!
I'm worried about the birth rate, which you alluded to earlier. The contrary to, like most people think we have like too many people on the planet, but actually this is an outdated view. This is assuming that AI is fine, assuming that there's a benevolent future with AI. I think that the biggest problem the world will face in 20 years is population collapse. Collapse.
I agree.
I want to emphasize this. The biggest issue in 20 years will be population collapse. Not explosion, collapse. It's very easy to see what the world will look like in 20 years because humans have a 20-year boot sequence. So like you say, okay, well, who was born last year? Okay, now you know what the world will look like in 20 years. It's that easy.
I absolutely agree with that. The population problem is going to be facing huge challenge. 1.4 billion people in China sounds a lot, but I think next 20 years we'll see this thing will bring big trouble to China, and the population decreasing of the speed of population decreasing is going to speed up.
The baby boom generation was born 1946 to 1964, and when they were in elementary school and junior high, and as they graduated and entered the workforce in the 1960s, mid-1960s, the baby boom generation saw their parents' income almost double. Weekly wages and benefits, as reported by the USA Bureau of Labor Statistics, went from $11 an hour to $19.55 per hour for the average worker. So the boomers' childhood and teenage experience was the country was getting better off and people were getting more prosperous.
Overpopulation, so long predicted, has stolen upon us. It's getting worse week by week.
In the 1960s, a new kind of fear began to spread across America.
As they went to college and entered the workforce, the media began telling them there was scarcity. We're running out of resources, we're overpopulated, we're running out of oil. And the baby boomers, as they tried to become adults with children, were worried about the future. And as they got older, they saw wages begin to fall. And the reason they accepted wages falling was they believed we were running out of resources. Candidate Carter predicted we were going to run out of oil. The Club of Rome predicts there's limits to growth because we have a lack of resources. And so the baby boom generation was told by the media, politicians, and our social elites, it's over, the party's been fun, but we're running out of resources. We can't have rising prosperity. So they totally accepted the notion that standard of living should be going down, and it did. From 1972 to 1996, the average household made $9,000 less in income. And this seemed rational to the baby boomers because the late night talk shows, Saturday Night Live, the Johnny Carson Tonight Show, all told them repeatedly over a 20-year period, we were running out of resources. This false myth of scarcity had a consequence. It caused people to accept a future that was not inevitable. If we doubled workers' wages from 1950 to 1972, we certainly could have doubled them again.
Take a look at recent history. In a 1966 article, Time magazine, looking ahead toward the future, and what the rise of automation would mean for average Americans. Included, by 2000, the machines will be producing so much that everyone in the U.S. will, in effect, be independently wealthy. With government benefits, even non-working families will have, by one estimate, an annual income of $30,000 to $40,000. Now, that was in 1966 dollars. It'd be like $100,000, $120,000 a year now. How to use leisure meaningfully will be a major problem.
In 1977, the worst winter in a century struck the United States. Arctic cold gripped the Midwest for weeks on end. Great blizzards paralyzed cities of the Northeast. One desperate night in Buffalo, 8 people froze to death in marooned cars. At weather stations in the far north, temperatures have been dropping for 30 years. Seacoasts, long free of summer ice, are now blocked year-round. According to some climatologists, within a lifetime, we might be living in the next ice age. Pat Bushnell was on the road that night.
Traffic just absolutely stopped. I was afraid of being stuck in the car all night long with the cold and the wind, running out of gas. And then what? I think that if we had to go through a real bad winter, just like we just went through, I think we'd have to think about moving someplace else.
Move where? The brutal Buffalo winter might become common all over the United States. Climate experts believe the next ice age is on its way. According to recent evidence, it could come sooner than anyone had expected. At weather stations in the far north, temperatures have been dropping for 30 years. Seacoasts, long free of summer ice, are now blocked year-round. According to some climatologists, within a lifetime, we might be living in the next ice age.
What is the secret of Soylent Green? New York City in the year 2022. Nothing runs anymore. Nothing works. But the people are the same, and the people will do anything to get what they need.
This is the police.
What they need most is Soylent Green.
The supply of Soylent Green has been exhausted. Return to your home.
What is the secret of Soylent Green?
In the film, the secret of Soylent Green is its people. Soylent Green is the food the humans are eating, and the average humans are eating the reprocessed bodies of the old and the prisoners and the rioters who are being killed by the government. That is what Hollywood was telling us our future would be in the year 2022.
In the 70s, in the United States, we did clean up quite a few lakes, and we did reduce the air pollution in quite a few cities. But there was essentially no progress on the global problems. Our book, Limits to Growth, was the first concrete effort using a computer to look at trends that unfold over decades, even a century. We were trying to understand long-term physical demands on the planet. And in the 70s, we were thinking that probably in the period 2010 to 2030 was when the planet would start to encounter limits. And that when you hit the limits, the tendency is to overshoot them and collapse, not to even out in a nice, orderly fashion. The book was officially released in March of 1972, and the inaugural event was a press conference in Washington, D.C.
To have this opportunity.
The book was rather quickly translated into 35 languages and sold millions. It was a phenomenon.
Here is what Dr. Meadows' computer shows. Since the year 1900, the Earth's resources, there at the top of the chart, have been steadily used up as population, food consumption, and production of goods have soared. Ahead of us, sometime after the year 2000, this computer study foresees calamity. Resources drop more steeply, and food and production follow suit. Population continues to expand for perhaps one more generation, then collapses calamitously as deprivation takes hold.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it.
Overpopulation, so long predicted, has stolen upon us. It's getting worse week by week.
In the 1960s, a new kind of fear began to spread across America.
The U.S. could be busting out at the seams by the end of the century. If we do not, by humane means, limit our numbers, then numbers are going to be limited by more famines and shortages and consequent social conflicts.
The idea that human population was outstripping the Earth's ability to support mankind was a powerful one. And in the hands of one man,
population growth will kill you stone cold dead.
The message reached a wider audience than ever before. But what became of the population bomb?
How many years do you have to not have the world end to decide that it didn't end because that reason was wrong?
Stanford biologist Paul Ehrlich didn't start out as a prophet of doom. His area of study focused on butterflies. But after visiting the crowded streets of Delhi, he had a realization.
If we continue to let population grow, and if we continue to exploit the underdeveloped countries, if we continue to pollute the seas with a wide variety of compounds and so on, it's very difficult for me to picture things holding together for more than another decade or so.
The basic point is so simple. We have a finite planet with finite resources, and in such a system, you can't have infinite population growth.
Ehrlich laid out his hypothesis in a slim volume called The Population Bomb. It was a call to action for many, including a student Ehrlich advised, Stuart Brand.
There's too many people, and we'd like to see people have fewer children and better ones.
The whole idea that people make more people who make more people until there's too many people and by then it's too late, that's a very persuasive argument.
Adrienne Germain, a young women's health advocate, found herself drawn to Ehrlich as well, due to his support of birth control.
The message was that we were already in a crisis, and if we didn't have urgent and immediate action, the world would simply destroy itself.
Look at what the year 2000 will be. Our cities are going to be choked with people. They're going to be choked with traffic. They're going to be choked with crime. They're going to be choked with pollution. And they will be impossible places in which to live.
Wait, what?
Paul's picture of doom and gloom looked real.
Net world population is increasing by 23 people every 10 seconds. It's clear that world population growth remains completely out of control.
I bought it totally. Many of my friends bought it totally. I organized an event for 60 people to starve in public.
What were you trying to prove?
It's about pain in the world. Maybe anybody who's thinking of having a third child ought to go hungry a week.
The mode became, don't have kids. There's enough of them in the world. And if your friends have kids, it's fine if they feel uncomfortable about that.
We had formed an organization called Zero Population Growth, and then Johnny took me on The Tonight Show.
Would you welcome Dr. Paul Ehrlich?
You have to get the death rate and birth rate in balance, and there's only two ways to do it. One is to bring the birth rate down, the other is to push the death rate up.
I did the show maybe 20 times, and we went from 6 chapters and 600 members to 600 chapters and 60,000 members.
We're starting in now. This is the first step.
The Bagleys belong to a growing number of young marrieds who favor ZPG, Zero Population Growth.
How many children do you have?
2. I have 2 children.
Ehrlich's views on how to bring the birth rate down were concrete. Compulsion if voluntary methods fail, creating a blacklist of people, companies, and organizations impeding population control in the U.S., responsibility prizes for childless marriages, a tax on children, and a luxury tax on diapers and cribs.
The concerns about population became misanthropic. And it was taken with so much seriousness that Paul Ehrlich could recommend things like putting stuff in public water that would make people not as fertile.
Panic is not too strong a word to use for some of the advocates that I referred to as true believers.
It was a zeitgeist that was taking shape.
Attention, all citizens. Childbearing is herewith forbidden.
One of the things about zeitgeists is they have astonishing durability.
It appears that large families are on the way out, and ZPG may be possible.
The idea also took hold in the developing world, where governments like India's had already begun to embrace population control.
The core message of the book, population growth outstripping food supply, resonated quite a bit with India's elites, with the middle classes. They much preferred to believe that the poor were poor because of too many children, rather than being poor because of an unfair and unequal economic system.
Teddy Roosevelt, 2019, agrees with the woman who just spoke. The danger of overpopulation hysteria. If you believe the Earth is overpopulated, that we humans can't sustain ourselves on the planet given the resources we have, it justifies poverty, hunger, and starvation around the world. It's easy for middle class and upper middle class people to just shake their head and shrug their shoulders and say, yeah, people are gotta starve because there's just not enough resources to feed them.
If you start with that problem definition, then it's almost inevitable that there will be circumstances where governments and other actors will act in a way that is coercive.
In the mid-1970s, the Indian government began a controversial effort to encourage mass sterilization.
We do want to create an atmosphere in which people realize the importance of this program.
It led to abuses. Access to food aid and housing were sometimes used as coercion. Others weren't even given a choice.
More than 8 million sterilizations were performed, many forcibly. The people, in the words of one family planning expert, were treated like cattle.
Several days ago, crowds formed to protest being sterilized. The police opened fire and killed at least 50 of them.
Zero population growth is a tragic frame in the sense that it was assumed that there was no way out, that people would just go on reproducing until there really was a desperate circumstance in the world.
Ehrlich's message could be summed up in a dramatic prediction.
Sometime in the next 15 years, the end will come. And by the end, I mean an utter breakdown of the capacity of the planet to support humanity.
Predictions do not necessarily come true. The critics go in and look at these little stories that won't come true, and when they didn't come true, say, Ehrlich was wrong. I was recently criticized because I had said many years ago that I would bet that England wouldn't exist in the year 2000. Well, England did exist in the year 2000, but that was only 14 years ago.
But Ehrlich says it could still be just a matter of time.
One of the things that people don't understand is that timing to an ecologist is very, very different from timing to an average person.
How many years do you have to not have the world end to decide whatever reason you thought the world was going to end, that actually maybe it didn't end because that reason was wrong?
Ehrlich predicted that by the 1970s, India would be starving. Quite to the contrary. The Green Revolution came to India with a big bang and a boom in such a rapid way that India has never looked back.
Although an estimated 3 million children around the world still die of malnutrition every year, the Green Revolution's farming technology helped lessen rates of hunger in the developing world over the decades, even as the world's population skyrocketed.
I know Paul Ehrlich reasonably well, and I respect him as a biologist. I don't and never have, and he knows it, agreed with his views on population. There's a tendency to apply to human beings the same sort of models that may apply for the insect world. The difference, of course, is that human beings are conscious beings, and we do all kinds of things to change our destiny.
Paul Ehrlich saw a density of people that frightened him, but with time we've been able to look past the car window into what's actually going on with the demographics of the people who live there, and they're not having so many kids, and that's changed the whole story.
Dire predictions of an overpopulated planet have been with us for centuries. What if they're just plain wrong? That's effectively what Daryl Bricker and John Ibbotson argue in their new book. It's called Empty Planet: The Shock of Global Population Decline. Hey, John, you first. The fears of overpopulation clearly have been with us for a long time. To what extent do you feel this book puts that to rest?
Well, not to rest. It raises a question about it, though. And by the way, those fears are with us still. If you're watching Netflix, if you're going to the movies, how often is the plot premised on the notion that we have so overpopulated the Earth that we've despoiled the atmosphere and we can only live on, moons of Jupiter?
Welcome. The time has come to select one courageous young man and woman for the honor of representing District 12 in the 74th Annual Hunger Games.
I volunteer! I volunteer as tribute!
Our tributes